When the weather gets cold, that means one thing. It's soup season. And this week I'm making 5 of my absolute favorites, starting with a creamy broccoli soup with crispy nutty crumbles. This is somehow the perfect soup to serve at a fancy pants dinner party, as well as the soup you'd serve to picky kids to get them to eat their greens and not complain about it. So we'll start by prepping our veg. We've got 1 yellow onion, 4 cloves of garlic, and a pound of broccoli. And we're using the entire head, stalks and all. The stalks actually contain the most fiber, so they're super good for you. And everything's getting blended anyway, so you won't notice the difference. It's like a smoothie, only savory and warm. Okay, it's a soup. Now add some olive oil to a Dutch oven over medium heat. Get those onions going. They'll need about 6 minutes to just start getting golden, and then we can add in the garlic and some red pepper flakes. I'm adding a 1/4 cup of white wine here to deglaze the pan, and the acidity in the wine actually makes the flavors pop a bit more, so that's why I love using it. But if you are booze-free, you can just add a splash of vegetable broth here, and then finish the soup later with a big squeeze of lemon juice. Sauté the broccoli stems and florets for about 2 minutes, and then pour in 3½ cups of low-sodium vegetable broth. To make this soup a complete meal and add in some protein and fiber, we're sneaking in a whole can of cannellini beans, and to amp up the creaminess, a cup of raw cashews. The cashews will soften as the soup simmers, so there's no need to soak them beforehand. Depending on how your soup looks, you might want to top it off with a little extra broth just to cover the broccoli and cashews. Bring this to a boil and then reduce the heat to a simmer, partially cover the pan, and cook for 15 minutes. In the meantime, we'll get to work on the nutty crumble topping. I love a creamy soup, but sometimes I find the texture can be a little one note after a few slurps, and these crumbles add such a fun contrasting crunch. Plus the leftovers will stay good for a few weeks. You're going to start by toasting some pine nuts in olive oil. I know. Pine nuts are basically the Beyonce of nuts. Gorgeous, rich, and kind of unattainable, but cashews will totally get the job done. They're like one of Destiny's lesser children in this analogy. After a couple of minutes, add in your panko breadcrumbs, which are lighter and crispier than regular breadcrumbs, and toast everything for 2 to 3 minutes until the panko is golden brown. Then you'll finish with some chili flakes and flaky sea salt. Now it's time to blend the soup. If your blender jar is not the size of a fish tank like this one, you might need to do this in 2 batches. I'm adding in a big handful of basil, which will give the soup a super lovely freshness. For a rich, savory backbone, we've got nutritional yeast and soy sauce, plus Dijon mustard and lemon juice for a bright tang. Now before you blend, this part is important, make sure to remove the center cap on the blender's lid and replace it with a towel. If you leave the cap on, the steam can build up inside the blender and you could have a mega blender explosion, which obviously you want to avoid. To serve, drizzle on your fanciest olive oil, a sprinkle of the crispy nutty crumbles, and a little extra basil.
Look how elegant and beautiful this looks. I'm so excited.
Wow, broccoli has never tasted this good. We are starting off with a bang. This is incredible. It is so creamy and rich from the toasted pine nuts, but it's still broccoli and beans, so it's so wholesome. And we've got some nice freshness from the basil and the lemon. So if every soup is as good as this one, we are in for a very delicious week. Next up, we're making a saucy white bean soup. It's a pretty classic bean soup recipe, but with a few powerhouse ingredients to amp up the flavor and make it super savory and addictive. In recipes where beans are the star of the show, like this one, I typically opt for dried beans over canned because you get a better texture and a smug sense of self-satisfaction. Now, any dried white bean from the grocery store will work great, but these heirloom beans from Rancho Gordo take the soup over the top. And I always soak my beans because they're easier for me to digest, and soaking them in salt plus baking soda helps the beans get tender and cook more quickly. Once the beans are soaked, it's time to work on the base of the soup, which is a pretty classic French mirepoix. It's 2 parts onion to 1 part each of carrots and celery. And I like to dice them somewhat finely so they kind of melt into the soup. Heat up a Dutch oven or soup pot over medium heat with a bit of olive oil, and we're going to saute the mirepoix until it's softened, about 8 to 10 minutes. If you're on team, I want a little spice in everything I eat, then go ahead and add some red pepper flakes. Add your soaked and drained beans to the pot along with 6 cups of water, a bit of salt, and lots of freshly cracked black pepper. While that comes to a boil, we'll make our bouquet garni, which is just another fancy French phrase. It means a bundle of herbs tied together, and it is my favorite technique for adding more flavor to soups. Plus, it takes just 15 seconds of work. It's like wrapping a little present for your soup. Now that the soup has come to a boil, I'm adding in a little bit of better than bouillon. I always have a jar of this stuff in the fridge because it adds this amazing deep savory flavor, almost like a really rich chicken broth, without the chicken of course, and it's pretty potent, so I'm just adding 2 teaspoons. Make sure to mix it really well so that it dissolves completely. I'm transferring the pot to my main stove to boil for 10 minutes so I can do some multitasking and prep these 2 heads of garlic. First, you'll remove the outer layers of papery skin and then slice about 1/4 inch off the top to expose the cloves, kind of like if you were giving the garlic a flat top haircut. Now turn off the heat and add in the garlic plus a glug of extra virgin olive oil for some richness. And I actually like to cook the soup in the oven rather than the stove because it's less babysitting and the beans actually turn out a little bit creamier. Depending on the variety of your beans and their freshness, this could take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half at 350 Fahrenheit. You'll know the soup is ready when the beans are creamy and tender. Go ahead and scoop out the bouquet garni as well as a bit of the hot broth. Oh, and scoop out the garlic heads as well. I like adding miso to the soup for even more savory goodness, but since miso tends to clump, it's easier to dissolve it in a bit of hot broth and then add it back to the pot. Once the garlic is cool enough to touch, squeeze out those buttery cloves like they're the last bit of toothpaste in the tube. They are super savory and sweet and so delicious, just like the last bit of toothpaste in the tube. Just me? Anywho, add a little bit more olive oil. It is the only fat source in this recipe, so a little bit goes a long way in making this soup genuinely craveable. Plus a few cracks of black pepper and a little salt to taste. This is definitely the soup I would make if I weren't feeling well or if I've been eating like a lot of junk food and I need to reset my system. It's so nourishing, but it's still really flavorful and rich, and I am so excited to eat this. I'll see you tomorrow with our next soup recipe. The soup of the day for Wednesday is a creamy Indian spiced corn soup. It's like corn chowder, but Indian style. And I know what you're thinking, corn is not in season in winter, but fresh corn is still available at my local supermarket in Southern California, probably at a lot of other supermarkets, so thanks globalization, I guess. Even if you can't find fresh corn, frozen sweet corn works really well in this recipe. And if you are using the fresh stuff, one thing I like to do is to milk the corn cobs by scraping them with the back of a spoon, or juice them, whatever terminology you prefer. The corn milk / corn juice makes the soup extra creamy, but feel free to skip the step if you want to shave off a couple minutes. For the rest of your prep, you're going to gather what I call the holy quaternity of Indian aromatics: onion, garlic, ginger, and green chili, and dice up everything pretty small. Now for my favorite ingredient, we've got curry leaves. You can find these at Indian grocery stores, or if you can't, you can order dried leaves online. Or if you have a lovely Indian mother or aunt like I do, she may allow you to steal some from her garden. The curry leaves make this soup extra special and, in my opinion, definitely worth seeking out. For a sneaky protein boost, I'm also measuring out some silken tofu. Don't worry, you won't taste it. It'll blend right in, and it's also just very satisfyingly jiggly. Heat up a large, deep sauté pan over medium-high, drop in some coconut oil or whatever oil you like, and now we're just going to bloom or toast some black mustard seeds and cumin seeds. Using whole spices is one of my favorite ways to level up flavor, but if you don't have these, I've listed substitutions in the written recipe. Once you hear the mustard seeds popping, it'll happen pretty quickly, reduce the heat to medium and add the onions. We'll sweat those until they're softened, then add in the corn with some salt and pepper to season until the corn starts to lightly brown. If things start to stick, add a splash of water to deglaze the pan. It's time to add in the garlic, ginger, green chili, and a little bit of ground turmeric. After about a minute, we'll add in 20 curry leaves or so. You can always add more if you like, and saute them until they're softened. Now grab your blender jar. Mine already has the corn milk in it, and you'll add in the silken tofu, a can of coconut milk to make it extra creamy, and a big squeeze of lime juice for some tangy brightness, and then half of the sauteed corn onion mixture. And I am keeping the other half whole so that we have some nice textural variety in the soup. Once this is pureed and creamy, pour it back into the pan and simmer until everything is warmed through. As you can see, this soup is thick with 2 C's. So if you prefer a soup with a little less junk in the trunk, you can always add some water and thin it out. Season with salt and pepper to taste or more lime juice as you like. I like to top off my soup with a little extra charred corn for the "I spent hours on this" vibe, and then fresh cilantro and chopped peanuts for a little crunch. I think I have died and gone to heaven. This one is unfairly delicious. The curry leaves and the mustard seeds are such a fun addition to corn, and the coconut milk makes it so luxurious. It's like a dream trifecta. If you like corn, if you like Indian food, you are going to absolutely fall in love with this one. The next soup in my winter rotation is a spiced butternut squash soup with crispy lentils. To organize this recipe as efficiently as possible, we're gonna start by cooking the lentils. So bring a saucepan of water to a boil, season with a little salt, and add 3/4 to 1 cup of green lentils or round lentils and simmer for just 8 to 10 minutes. You want the lentils to be al dente with a bite, definitely not soft. While the lentils are going, we'll get started on some of the other prep. You're gonna finely chop 1 large yellow onion and 8 garlic cloves. If loving garlic is a crime, then you can come see me during visiting hours at the flavor jail. Since we're roasting the lentils to get them crispy, I want them to be as dry and moisture-free as possible, so let them hang out on a dish towel. And in the meantime, we can put together our beautiful warming spice blend. We've got cumin, turmeric, ground ginger, coriander, white pepper, and cayenne for a little kick. Oh, and a little freshly grated nutmeg. We'll also break down our butternut squash. Peeling and dicing butternut squash can be kind of cumbersome, so do not worry. All you need to do for this recipe is cut them in half lengthwise and scoop out the seeds and weird sticky bits. To ensure the squash cooks through and gets nice and tender, I normally like to do some crosshatch marks across the surface of the squash. I'm not sure it's really needed here because we've got like this large crater situation going on, but I will try my best and hope for the best. Drizzle a little olive oil onto the squash, plus some salt and pepper, and try to rub it into all of the little crevices. Flip the squash over so it's flesh side down and pop them in the oven at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. Depending on how girthy your squash is, it'll take 40 to 55 minutes in the oven. In the meantime, add the lentils to a separate sheet pan and toss them with about a tablespoon of olive oil and some salt and pepper to season. These will join the squash in the oven, but a little bit later when there's only 15 or 20 minutes left on the squash. While everything roasts, we're going to make our soup base. So heat up some olive oil in the same pan you used to cook the lentils, medium-high heat. Add the onions and saute them for about 7 minutes or until they're softened and just starting to turn golden. Add in all of that garlic for a few minutes and then your spice mix. Deglaze any of the stuck food bits with a splash of vegetable broth and then pour in the rest of your broth, about 3 cups, and simmer for 5 minutes just to warm everything through. Once the squash is fork tender and cool enough to touch, go ahead and peel off the skin. It should come off pretty easily with your hands. Add all of this beautiful orange goodness to a large blender alongside the soup base, plus a little bit of red wine vinegar for a bright tang. To add a bit of creaminess to this veggie soup, I like to add a half cup of either cashew cream or coconut milk. Today I went with cashew cream since I already had some in my fridge from a few days ago, but coconut milk is great for a shortcut. Your blended soup should be a beautiful creamy orange color with a velvety texture, but if it's too thick for your taste, again, you can always thin it out with some broth or even water. Grab your crispy lentils from the oven and we are ready to assemble. Transfer the soup to bowls and top them with your lentils, some chopped parsley, plus a drizzle of olive oil and a sprinkle of flaky sea salt. And some crusty bread doesn't hurt either. All right, this one looks almost too pretty to eat, but someone must do the job, and it's me. I love how the crispy lentils kind of break up the creaminess of the soup. It makes it a little bit more of a fun treat, and the warming spices are so cozy. So if you have any leftover butternut squash this season, definitely give this soup a try. Next in our lineup is a creamy potato leek soup. I would describe this one as rustic comfort food, but a little elevated thanks to an herby oil topping. You're gonna start by cleaning your leeks, which are very, very filthy. Ugh, gross. Peel the papery outer layers and then thinly slice the tender white and light green parts into rounds. The dark green tops usually get tossed, but they are edible, so I'm gonna add in some of those as well. The best way I have found to clean leeks is to agitate them in cold water to loosen up all of that dirt, and then let them rest so the dirt settles to the bottom of the bowl. We'll come back to them in a few minutes. In the meantime, we're making another bouquet garni. This one has sage, thyme, and bay leaves, and then you'll finally chop enough garlic to ward off Dracula, plus drain 2 cans of cannellini beans. You could also use dried white beans to make the soup even better, about 8 ounces or 225 grams, but you would need to cook the beans separately first. There's a lot of dirt settled at the bottom of this bowl that we do not want, so I'm scooping out the leeks instead of draining them in a colander. If you don't have a spider like this, you can just use your paws. Give your leeks a little pitter-pat, and while they dry, you'll wash, peel, and dice about 12 ounces of Yukon Gold potatoes. This is going to bring a beautifully creamy texture to our soup. We are ready to start cooking, so heat up your Dutch oven or soup pot over medium-high with a little bit of olive oil. Add the leeks and saute them for about 7 minutes or until they're softened and lightly browned. Then it's time to add the garlic and chili flakes. I'm using Aleppo pepper, but you can use whatever you have. Stir frequently for 1 to 2 minutes, and if things start to stick, you know what to do. Deglaze with a touch of broth. Add in the cannellini beans, the diced potatoes, some salt and pepper, plus 4 cups of good quality vegetable broth and your bouquet garni. Bring this to a boil, and then we're gonna cook it at a simmer covered for about 20 to 25 minutes. While the soup cooks, let's make a very special addition, an herby oil. This one is simple but adds so much flavor and really takes the soup over the top. You're gonna finely chop some flat leaf parsley and dill, zest 2 lemons, and grate a garlic clove on top. Basically, you're making a gremolata. Add everything to a small jar, or, try to get it in a jar. Oops. Along with a 1/4 cup of good olive oil and some flaky sea salt. Give everything a stir, and voila, you have a delicious herby oil. Once the potatoes are tender, remove the bouquet garni. And by this point in the video, y'all already know I'm about that creamy soup life. So I'm using an immersion blender to blend half of the soup to make it thicker. But don't blend the whole thing, you still want some texture. Get the soup back on the stove and stir in some chopped baby spinach because greens are good for you. Once the spinach has wilted, we are ready to serve. Ladle the soup into bowls, swirl in that delicious herby oil, and if you have some crusty bread, now's the time to break it out. That herb oil really takes the soup over the top. It is so delicious. It's got that nice creamy backbone from the potatoes and the beans, but it still feels very wholesome and nourishing. And if you want to make any of these soup recipes, I've got all of the printable recipes linked in the description box below. I'll see you in the next video. Bye!